Hey there, everyone. How's my favorite class? I Before this pandemic, I really thought I was much better looking than I am. I guess I'm gonna have to try to get by on personality from now on. That's the realization I've come to. Anyway, sorry I've been neglecting you guys a little bit. It's a little difficult to change the nature of this class, which is mostly discussion. And as I said, I'm trying to formulate a way to make those meetings meaningful because I've had meetings and I've had classes and I've had family and I've had friends playing Quiplash on Zoom, and it's very confusing and chaotic and not as meaningful as I want it to be. So I'm trying to figure that out. If you have any suggestions, let me know, but I have some ideas that maybe we can pursue on Friday or Monday. I seriously miss you guys. This A&R class that I teach is very often quite challenging, and the personality of classes really differs from semester to semester. And this was a good one. We had a good group of people, and I'm really, really, really sorry that this happened to us for a variety of reasons, but mostly because I enjoyed talking with you guys and hearing your opinions about stuff. So this lecture is going to be about how to find artists, which is an outline I sent out to you quite some time ago, I guess a week ago or so. And it should be something you're pursuing in order to find the best artist possible. We're probably coming up to, I don't know, a week or 10 days when that's due. So I hope you're looking and finding something really good so that I can brag about you to other classes and say, they discovered this artist, or this artist, or this artist. And some of the strategies we have in here are obviously for people who are working in A&R, but they really apply to what your job should be in isolating an artist that has some serious potential. So let's get into it, shall we? First of all, many A&R people find things through unsolicited material. Now, a lot of people will not do that, will not look at unsolicited material for a couple of reasons. One is there's not a lot of time to do it. And, you'd be spending all your day. I don't know if you've ever been to an A&R person's office, but it's just stacked with CDs, or their inbox is flooded with MP3s. So there's a lot to listen to. And also there is historically some legal exposure that's there, is that from copyright law. You want this to be a copyright law class? I can do that. Let me do my best impersonation of Professor Wagner. No, I'm not going to do that. Is that, to prove copyright infringement, you have to show access, that somebody had access to it and heard it. And so A&R people, lots of people in this business, don't listen to anything. They just send it right back to the person unopened, saying that so that they can't prove access. Well, the way today is, number one, you have access to anything because everything's up on the internet. And number two, usually A&R people are not involved in the creation of the composition, which is really where copyright infringement suits happen. So if they're not involved in the creation of that and not credited with songwriting, that they were a songwriter on the composition, then there's probably no exposure there. So I wouldn't be afraid of that the way some people are. And I'm a lawyer, and I'm overly cautious about things. Uh-oh, got a message. Overly cautious about things, but I wouldn't worry about that. And as far as the time goes, I say, put your underlings to work on that. Just tell somebody, an intern or somebody that's new to the department, here's the stack. Go and listen to it, and let me know what you think if there's anything that stands out to you. And this is a way for people that are interning, etc., that can establish a reputation, that they've listened to 1,000 things, and here's 3 things I think really stand out. And so your judgment comes to get respected there and gives you the opportunity to move forward in the company. And sometimes, just paying attention to this kind of stuff in general is important to getting those entry-level positions. I had somebody who applied for a position as assistant A&R to Atlantic Records. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but Atlantic Records has an office here in Nashville, a completely non-country office. And they were looking for an intern, and when they interviewed each candidate, they said, come to me within the next 24 hours and give me a playlist of things from unsigned or local acts. And that's how they judge you within that department. There are other skills that you might want to bring to the table, some admin skills that we'll probably talk about. But really what they want is somebody with that kind of musical taste, and this is the way you can demonstrate it. What happened to my voice? Too many lectures. Secondly, you have to build up, and this is important in every aspect of the business, but you have to build up a network of people from every area of this business. And you're going to get referrals about artists from all of these individuals. And you'll get them only not just by knowing people, that's not a relationship, but establishing some kind of trust level that they have in you. That if they have an artist themselves, as a publisher or a booking agent, or even if they just know of someone, they will refer that artist to you because they trust that you and your capacity as an A&R person and the label itself is somebody that they can trust to put their efforts into it and to help to develop this artist, help to promote the artist, etc. So you can see from somebody like Ahmet Ertegun that they had a tremendous reputation, that people wanted to be on that label. And so they would get lots of referrals from various individuals. And those referrals can come from any area. I just listed a few of them. Obviously, lawyers, moi, as Miss Piggy would say. Is that too old of a reference these days, Miss Piggy? I didn't even watch that. How old was that? How long ago was that? Is she Mrs. Piggy now? I have no idea. So I think you'd be surprised at how much impact lawyers have on A&R, is that they are true resources. And if you are an artist somewhere in the class, who's an artist in here? I remember you guys. You want to establish a relationship with a lawyer because a lawyer can get you in. They will not accept you unless they think you have the capacity to generate income, that you're good enough as an artist like that, and they have a pipeline to the A&R people. And this is true especially these days in Nashville. Nashville, I don't know if you know this, but I may mention this a couple of times, it's kind of looked down upon by the other two musical centers of New York and Los Angeles. And only recently, within the last 10 certainly, but even going back 20 years ago, has there been an effort to make Nashville more legitimate and credible in the eyes of either one of those coasts. And that was largely accomplished by a lawyer here in town. His name was Jim Zumwalt, Z-U-M-W-A-L-T. He's still very active, but he's about 150 years old. Don't tell him I told you that. And Zumi, he's called Zumi to his friends, and he made a concerted effort back in the 90s to put Nashville on the map as a source of really good, legitimate, non-country music. And he has some people that he's mentored in that capacity, and there are younger lawyers these days. Austin Adams is one, and Kent Marcus, who got Kings of Leon, their record deal, and several others who that it behooves you, if you are an artist, to associate with them, and it behooves you as an A&R person to be in contact with the legal community, because they are the ones that discover more artists than you could ever dream of. Managers, obviously, producers, journalists. You'd be surprised also how important journalists are to this business, and how many former journalists ultimately become A&R people because some of the qualities that lend themselves to great A&R they possess by being journalists. That is, absolute music lovers, consumers of a lot of music, critiquers of a lot of music, etc. So that's why we have somebody like Jerry Wexler at Atlantic, who came from that background, and many other legendary people. Tommy Silverman. Thank you, whoever did the report on Tommy Silverman, for not mentioning the fact that he looks eerily like O'Brien. Back in the 90s, I used to go to music conventions, and people would come up to me routinely and say, hey, Tommy, how's it going? And I'm like, I'm not Tommy, please, I'm not Tommy. It was more than inconvenient. It was insulting, because Tommy Silverman is one of the least attractive people on earth, and I'm being mistaken for him. So thank you for not mentioning that. Why did I just mention it? I don't know. I can feel people pausing this video right now and Googling him. It's sad. Producers, journalists, publishers. As we know, publishers in the new A&R, they take chances on a lot of artists, and so they are somebody who is a pipeline to ultimately get them record deals, because the value of that artist to a publisher is only if they get a record deal. Other artists is always good, because artists are part of communities, and as I mentioned a little bit later, there are sometimes pockets of artists that become very, very hot, that geographic area, and a lot of those people are in the same community, like the whole Sub Pop Seattle thing. And once one artist gets signed, they try to lift up the other artists to go as well. So that's a good source. Or artists sometimes are in studios, and they go and take a break, and they listen to the artist in the next studio, and they go, oh my God, this artist's good, and they try to help them out. So that's good to have. Booking agents are becoming the new A&R also, seeing how much money you can make on the road, that even if you don't have a record deal, that you can get a career going, and that ultimately, if you do get a record deal, it increases exponentially the kind of money that you can make with them. So somebody like Kane Brown was signed early on to William Morris, and where's my outline? to William Morris, and William Morris, the guy there, helped them get a record deal. I think his name is Austin Neal at William Morris. Other A&R people, that is, sometimes there's a competitive community, but it's also a cooperative community between A&R people. It's especially true here in Nashville, where everybody's friends, everybody came up together, etc. And sometimes an A&R person will say, you know, I love this artist, but I just can't develop them. I don't have the skills to deal with this type of artist or this type of music. Or maybe they can't get that artist signed to the label because the higher up person won't fund that thing or give their okay. And so they will say, hey, you should go over to this label, you should go to this A&R person, and they'll treat you better. And anyone, radio stations, there's just tons and tons of people in every corner of this business that you need to establish this whole big network of people. It's really fun to have that kind of community. It really is a community, especially here in Nashville with the geographic area, although it's expanding from just being Music Row. It's now downtown, it's in the Gulch, it's in Berry Hill. But it's still a lot more concentrated than you would find in Los Angeles for sure, where you can spend 3 hours getting from one label to another label. Referrals are important because they perform 3 functions that are important psychologically or practically to an A&R person. Number one, I keep looking at myself rather than the camera. What should I do? Number one, they're a filter. We said there's so much stuff to go through that it's impossible to go through everything. And so using these individuals acts as a filter, so only the really good stuff gets to you, and trusting the judgment of those people that are acting as the filter. It also helps to validate your own opinion about something. Getting attached and being an advocate for an artist and trying to get an artist signed to your label is a very, very it's very anxiety ridden, because what you're doing is you're placing your reputation and your job on the line. That's actually what you're doing. That's what I want you to think about when you're advocating for your artist in this class, is that your job is on the line here. Your money, your wallet, everything is on the line. Not with any one particular artist necessarily, but with the batting average that you have with artists that you're advocating. And so you don't like to be on an island. You don't like to be on an island all by yourself and say, I think this artist is great. It'd be, it's good to have that fortitude, and eventually in this business, when you get enough of a reputation, you can do something like that. But when you're younger, it's very, very difficult. So it was easy for John Hammond, remember him? Somebody did a report on, who started out in the 30s, and by the time he got to 1960, when he wanted to sign Bob Dylan, and nobody else could understand why he would want to do that, some folk singer who looks weird and sings even weirder. It was a chance that he really took, and he was called Hammond's Folly as a result, because nobody believed in it. But when you're younger and you're newer, you have to be very careful. And so if you're by yourself advocating for an artist, it's a little nerve-wracking. But if you have other people that are bringing it to you and believe in that artist as well, then it helps to validate your opinion. There's this famous A&R guy named Dave Novick. He worked for RCA and a bunch of other labels up until very recently. Signed NSYNC and many other notable artists. I read an article about him about 20 years ago talking about what A&R was like, and he said not only did he not like going to clubs because he had asthma and people smoked in clubs. Remember that in the old days when people could smoke in clubs? He said he would go, somebody would tell him to go see an artist, and he'd get to that club and he'd watch that artist, and he'd say at the end of the night, every artist that sucked was a relief. Because when you really like something, that means now I got to go to work, now I got to put my reputation on the line, etc. So it's a tough, tough thing. So you want some validation from some other sources that say, yeah, I know what you mean. This artist is very good. And then lastly, if you're getting a referral from someone like a publisher who has that artist signed, or a manager who has that artist signed, then it's indicative that there's other people that are going to help. They've established some or all of a team already, and now the record label is just the last piece to go into place. And there's nothing a label likes more than that, than to find an artist that has a manager, has a producer, has a publisher, and has a booking agent, because that's so many more people that are going to work on this artist to help to make them successful. And labels have gotten less and less active about developing and promoting artists. And so to have those additional entities on the team is a very, very, very important consideration, especially managers. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but maybe it could have been something that you learned investigating your A&R people and some of the major artists that have been signed is that a manager is quite often the biggest difference between a successful artist and an unsuccessful artist. And people will tell you there's plenty of talented people that never made it, but they had a bulldog manager who never took no for an answer and pushed that artist through when other managers might have been defeated. So that's anybody from the Beatles and Brian Epstein, who had to get rejection letters 2 times from each label that might be out there. Irving Azoff, who was a bulldog for the Eagles, one of the most successful artists in the world, and just about anybody else you want to name. If you name the biggest artists in the world, usually there will be a manager that not only is very good, but you probably know their name, which is unusual. So whether it's Colonel Tom Parker or Peter Grant for Led Zeppelin, those managers become as famous as the artists themselves because of how good they are at stuff. Here's one you might like. Consume as much media as possible. Now, that's obviously music through the radio, etc., to see what's going on, but also just to get a sense of the culture and the role that music plays in various other kinds of media, especially at the independent level, which is usually cutting edge. So consuming as much of that media as possible, which is easy during this coronavirus pandemic. And just getting a feel for what's going on, especially stuff that is just bubbling up or stuff that is suddenly making more noise than it used to, and looking for clues as to what is around the corner, because there is some money always to be made with what's happening now and imitating the sound and the artists and the music that happens to be popular at a given time. But the real money is in finding something that is beyond the curve, to understand and anticipate where things are going. And where are they going? We don't know. In terms of type of music, what is the next big thing? Or are we stuck at this music? I know we've been asking that question all semester long. I have my own ideas about that. And maybe I'll put that as a subject matter for one of our discussions. Would that be good? I think so. Radio, TV, movies, everything. Just consume as much as possible. Especially looking at what younger people are into, and especially looking at what college-age people are into, as I'll discuss in just a minute. And that'd be you. That's why I always say pay attention to what you're listening to, what you're doing, how you're hearing about music, how your friends are hearing about music, etc., because you are really anticipators of the future. Go out and hear live music. That's so very, very important. I think I told you about the time where one of the women in class, in the A&R class, stood up and yelled at people for not listening to music. It's really important to go out and listen to music, especially if you're a music lover, because there's nothing better than live music. I went out all the time when I was in college and in law school. We had lots and lots of opportunities to hear music. I know that's not so possible here in Murfreesboro. Why is that? Why is that? What happened to the vibrant musical scene in Murfreesboro? That bar, I don't know what they call it now, Main Street, that used to be a venue where lots of bands would come through and play there, especially because, I don't know if you know this, even though we refer to Nashville as Music City, Nashville was not Music City when I moved here 20 years ago. There was hardly any live music going on. Can you believe that? Most major acts would bypass this city because they couldn't get enough of an audience. There were very few venues around town. There was no Bridgestone. There was no Ascend Amphitheater. There was the Municipal Auditorium, which had some shows. There was this Starwood Amphitheater, which went out of business because it couldn't keep up. There was a couple of clubs, but nothing like the scene we have today with Mercy Lounge and Marathon and City Winery and all that stuff. So a lot of people would actually come to Murfreesboro because you could get a crowd of 300 to 500 people from the college-age crowd there. So that's what you should be doing, seeing as much live music as possible. A lot of it is very, very inexpensive, but not only do you get to hear bands and see them in their natural element and you see how people react to them, which is really, really important, is that you can listen to the music and say, that's okay. And then you go and hear them live. Not only made the music be better live, but also you get to see what the audience reaction is, how passionate it might be. And, just the same way Ahmet Ertegun signed Bette Midler by going to see 300 people dancing on tables. If she had sent him just a demo and of her singing, it wouldn't have had nearly the same kind of impact. Why won't people leave me alone? So get out there and listen to music. It's not that expensive. You're lying to me. I see lots of shows that I want to go to that are 10 or 20 bucks, which is, not bad, not bad at all. So that's going out to clubs, and also there's formal showcases. If you are in the A&R business, you will get invitations on a regular basis, particularly in the summer here in Nashville, where, a couple times a week, a record label, a publisher, a manager, a booking agency puts on a showcase for one of their artists to try to generate interest in them. And they usually have nice hors d'oeuvres and free drinks and fun. So get out and listen to people playing live. Also, read stuff. Can you read? Now, this might have been a little more difficult in the paper era, but in the digital era, it's really possible to consume as much music journalism as possible. There are lots of periodicals that are devoted specifically to music or to entertainment. So things like Rolling Stone, which is only about 12 pages long now, a very excellent periodical out of Los Angeles called Music Connection, which is really kind of almost basically an A&R tool, is that it reviews demos and live shows of bands in that area, in the Los Angeles area, and has interviews with A&R people and all sorts of good stuff to see what's going on out there. International magazines like Mojo out of England, which is Rolling Stone on steroids, really good magazine that covers everyone from the biggest artists to the unsigned artists and reviews their records and their shows, and tend to be much more literate about talking about music. So plenty of those kind of magazines, both nationally and internationally, that you should be consuming and finding that great unsigned band. Also, there are newspapers or magazines or some kind of periodical for every major city out there, and some smaller cities, that is devoted to politics and art and really heavily devoted to music. The Nashville version of this would be the Nashville Scene. I don't know if you read that or not, but it's very heavily music oriented. It's got a lot of stuff about politics, movies, all sorts of things, what's going on in the community. But if you want to find out who the really hot up-and-coming artists are in Nashville, that is something that you would read regularly, and you'd know about artists way before other people know about them. So somebody like our former student rapper girl, is that her name? Daisha. She made the cover of the magazine a couple of months ago. So I know all cities have it. I lived in Chicago. There was the Chicago Reader. When I went to school in University of Wisconsin in Madison, there was the Isthmus, because Madison, the campus, is built on an isthmus between two lakes, one of which has Otis Redding's body at the bottom of it, and a pair of my desert boots, because a girlfriend tipped over a canoe because she thought it was funny one day. So try to read as much of that stuff as possible. And if you're a music lover, you have the passion, the qualities we talked about that A&R people should have, you probably wouldn't mind doing that. I do it still all the time. I'm just incredibly interested in what's going on musically. Other kind of formal A&R showcases, bigger than just a single artist, or music conventions that occur around the country and around the world, are very productive to go to. Probably the one you know best is South by Southwest, which unfortunately was canceled for this year. I hope they reschedule it for the fall. Not as much of an A&R showcase as it used to be. It really started as, hey, everybody, all the A&R people from around the world come down to Austin and we'll have a party and we'll eat well, and you get to hear like 300 bands that you've never heard of before, and a lot of bands were signed out of that. So it was one central place, especially pre-internet, where that sort of thing could occur. It grew because, I don't know, there's more money to be made by getting tons and tons of people to go to this stuff, and so they started to get more established and already signed acts that were the primary reason that people would go. Still had a bunch of unsigned acts for sure, but really all the hubbub and publicity was about, oh, look, Drake's going to show up this year. So it's still productive, but not as pure of an A&R showcase as it used to be. And there's lots of those around the country. Sometimes they are denoted by these geographical acronyms. There's North by Northwest that takes place somewhere in the Northwest. There's a Bumbershoot that takes place in Seattle. There's a Toronto Music Festival. So there's plenty of them around. One of my favorite ones, and was a true, really cutting edge A&R convention, was the CMJ convention in New York every September. And CMJ stands for College Music Journal. And it was a periodical that was devoted to compiling what was going on at college radio. And college radio is not the most listened to media in the whole entire world. So it wasn't really important as to what kind of ratings these radio stations were getting, but it was more indicative of the fact that at college, you got a lot of cool kids who are interested in cool, undiscovered music, indie music. In fact, once something gets signed to a major label, they're not interested in it anymore. And so labels used to look really closely at what was going on in the college radio playlist for stuff that would ultimately emerge, whether it was an artist or even a whole genre of like grunge or EDM or whatever it might be. You'd find it there first. So paying attention, getting involved in college radio is a good thing. Number one, just to be on the staff or to DJ. And we used to send people to the CMJ conference every year. And it was in New York, and it was, I don't know, 400 bands over a 3-day period in bars all over New York City. And they were truly unsigned. And that was one that didn't get sullied the same way that South by Southwest got sullied, but CMJ, the journal itself, ran into some financial difficulties, and they're not doing it anymore. But someday they hope to resuscitate it. So that was always fertile ground. And then, of course, there's Nashville, especially with CMJ going under, and South by Southwest kind of not doing what they used to do. You'd think the it city of Nashville could get something going, and there have been many, many tries in order to facilitate that. We had a big conference here in the 90s called the Nashville Extravaganza. Is that what it was called? NEA? NEA Extravaganza. And that was started by the lawyer who was trying to put Nashville on the map. Do you remember what his name was? Zummy! Jim Zumwalt. And it became kind of a cool thing. And so it was like a mini South by Southwest. And for some reason, people leaving, running the organization, it kind of died out. We had another go at that with a conference called Next Big Nashville that was run by some people who worked at the Tennessean and at the Scene, at the Rage, which was a little insert to the Tennessean. Once again, started by journalists. And that didn't really get off the ground because really they were more interested in staying financially solvent. And so they would take any bands that submitted most of the bands that would submit the application fee. And what you need to do, assembling these conferences, is actually an A&R function. Because if you call all these people in from Los Angeles and New York and from London to come in and hear some great unsigned bands, if you've got bands set up so that they go to a club and listen to 8 bands and they all suck, well, they ain't going to come back the next year. And that's essentially what happened, is they tried to stay financially afloat rather than try to slowly build this thing and get some interest in it. So I would tell you that Nashville is ripe for one of these. People want to come here. People want an excuse to come here, particularly people in the music business from the East Coast and the West Coast. And if you did it the right time of the year, so it doesn't conflict with South by Southwest, maybe in the fall, when the weather gets a little nicer here in Nashville, I could see something like that taking off big time. So if you have the entrepreneurial spirit and the energy, try to think about how you could do that. Start out really small, give it a cool name, personally invite A&R people that you think are important to come down to that thing, have it be relatively modest the first couple of years where you only have a few bands, but you select them very carefully so that most of them are somebody that somebody would be interested in hearing, if not signing, and then gradually building it into something bigger. And it could be huge. It could be huge, I tell you. All right, pay attention to hotspots. And hotspots can happen geographically. We've seen it happen over and over again, although I don't know what the most recent one is. But if you go back to, I don't know, the British invasion, you go to Philadelphia Blue-Eyed Soul in the late 50s and early 60s. You go to the Minneapolis punk rock scene in the late 70s and early 80s. You do the grunge scene in Seattle. Is that various types of music in an artistic community quite often arise. The whole hip hop culture in New York, its various offshoots with Atlanta's version of it and Houston's version of it, etc. East Coast versus West Coast rap, all that kind of stuff. If you can find a cluster of artists, and especially if they're in a particular genre, and you're paying attention to it, and you get in early, you've got a real advantage to know what's going on and know what's going to be successful. You don't want to get in too late, because I can tell you, when I lived in Seattle during the grunge explosion, and Nirvana and Pearl Jam and a few others got signed and did very, very well, and then A&R people just flooded the place a little too late and paid million and multi-million dollar advances to artists that never went anywhere because they were just too late to the game, and the best artists had already been taken from that various geographical area. So keep your eyes open. I haven't really seen one lately. There was some threatening that Nashville was going to do it a few years ago when Kings of Leon was hot. And we had some other crappy bands, Hot Action Cop, and what was that stupid group? That tonight, was it Hot Shell Ray? We were starting to get a little bit of something going here. We also had a big singer-songwriter thing that happened. A group of people that I think still exists called 10 out of Tennessee, which included some really fabulous, fabulous singer-songwriters. None of them with songs that ultimately broke through, but Butterfly Butcher and Jeremy Lister and Katie Herzog and a whole bunch of really, really talented people. But that kind of music kind of wasn't popular when it exploded here, and none of them really had hit songs, which are very, very important. Hit songs, did I mention that ever? Did I mention that your artist that you promulgate for this project better have a hit song with a capital hit? Okay. Also, not just geographically, but there's also kind of circuits, live performance circuits, where sometimes you can find some artists that can really break through, especially because you're seeing them build an audience and get some sort of reputation. It doesn't always translate to the record business because some people are just great live performers and people don't want to buy their records, but quite often it does pay off. So there are things like, I don't know, in the Christian music industry, there's Christian circuits where people go around and play churches. And if you can see somebody getting a tremendous buzz going in that way, then maybe they could be signed and be turned into a recording artist as well. So an example of that would be Mercy Me. You know, with that song, I Can Only Imagine. They were selling out 2,000-seat churches and more. And still record labels weren't paying attention to them because they didn't look right. But it turns out that they had the song, and so it was something that could be developed. There's also the college music circuit. If you work at student programming, you know that there's an association, I think it's called NACA, where they try to book artists at college campuses. And quite often these artists can become quite well known and quite successful. So we have a graduate, Matt Barnes, I don't know if you know him, who has been successful for years and years doing that sort of thing. And Corey something from the Californians, Corey Smith. So you can find artists there that develop a reputation and a following by playing these little college circuits. Also, what was one more I could think of? If you're from Texas or Oklahoma, I'm sorry to hear that, but there's a little circuit of places to play in that area where people can get very, very popular and sell out 5,000 to 10,000 seat places. People like Pat Green, Robert Earl Keen, etc., that developed their whole reputation and following within a particular circuit that they play, from Fort Worth to Dallas to Oklahoma to Houston, whatever, and ultimately translated into some degree of success. Jack Ingram, another one who came out of there. So pay attention to that, and maybe even another A&R function would be to develop that same sort of circuit. That is, somebody who really understands music and the artists that would be popular and figures out a way to get them playing throughout the country to audiences that would enjoy them even the first time they hear them, which I think is a very, very important quality for an artist to have. So they get up on a stage and you are mesmerized by them immediately, even though you don't know any of the songs, either by virtue of the songs being so good or their performance being outstanding or the charismatic nature of that particular artist. All right, this is not as big as it used to be, but looking at independent labels, certainly back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, almost every decade of this business, you could find what was going to happen next at the independent labels, and the major labels were actually ill-equipped to take advantage of whatever evolution in music took place. And so the smart ones would look to the independent labels and poach artists from them because they didn't really understand the genre then. And it got so important for major labels to do this that they ultimately bought most of the bigger independent distributors so they could see what the sales levels were for each of these artists. They can know that, oh, look how much this artist is selling. Let's upstream them. Let's kick them out from that independent label up into our major label system. So that's probably not as important to do anymore because independent labels and independent artists are not as amenable to going to a major label. What do they need a major label for, especially if they're experiencing some degree of success? The only thing they need a major label for is for the major label to throw money at them and to throw a lot of money at them. So you don't want to do something like that, I don't think. The advantages are they're already developed, so takes that out of the equation, although I would be proud to develop an artist. I don't want to find somebody that's already developed. And they already have a fan base. You don't got to go looking for them. Because remember, what you're doing with every artist is figuring out who is the audience for that artist, how do I get this to that audience, and how else can I make money from this artist. Those are the three things you're looking for. Remember those three? I should give you a test or something, don't you think? We don't like tests. Disadvantages, as I said, they're already developed. And so